The Doppelganger. I never truly had a problem with where we lived. It was a secluded area, but that also just meant privacy was easy to come by. It was a small county in eastern Tennessee that had maybe 100 houses or so. It was just me and my parents alone in the mountains. Mom had gotten used to the mountain life and never gave much thought to leaving. My dad worked as a county game warden and usually never got home until around 8 or 9 at night. I remember one night, though. He came home rather early. He always had keys to open the door with and would typically come right in, grab something to eat, sit in his recliner, and then head straight to bed. But tonight he came in and silently sat at the table, not moving or eating. He just sat there with his head in his hands. "Something wrong, Dad?" I asked him. He turned to look at me with a grim look of sadness crawling over his face. Oddly enough, it seemed to quickly contort to a look of concern now. "Mike has been missing from the station for almost 2 days. Nobody has been able to track him down, and his family is becoming restless. Just been hard to face a wife and kids who think they've just lost their husband and father. That's all, buddy," he told me, with an almost solemn tone to his voice. Mike was his partner for the past few years. He was a younger man, no more than maybe 30 years old. Mom came in and started having a conversation with Dad while I returned to the TV. Their voices both cracked from time to time. I presumed it was due to the gravity of the situation. About 10 minutes later, Dad returned to the living room with Mom, and they turned the TV off while I was watching it. Before I could protest, they both looked at me and spoke. "Son, until this all clears up, I want you to promise me a few things, okay? From now on, don't open the door for anybody. Me and your mother both have keys, and we can let ourselves in." He told me while I listened intently. "We won't have a need to knock or call for you, and if you hear any of that, simply ignore it and go to your room. You have our cell phone numbers, so please just call us if you need to." He finished. I nodded my head, slightly concerned about the exact reasons for these specific rules, but it wasn't out of the ordinary for my parents to occasionally be strict. Agreeing to their terms, I went to sleep. I was on winter break from school, so I had no reason to rise early. The next morning, I got up while Mom was sending Dad off for work. They always gave each other a peck and said, "I love you," before parting ways. This morning, though, seemed somehow more dire than usual. There was a grave sense of concern in my mother's voice as they said goodbye. The day was rather normal, up until it was time for Dad to come home. He didn't use the keys like usual. He just knocked. I almost didn't think it was him until I remembered his truck lights pulling in through the window. I figured I'd play along and open the door with a funny face or a joke to greet him. But when I opened the door, I was only met with a furious father. "Trey, what was the one simple rule I told you to follow?" he said. His voice was stern and angered. "I'm sorry, Dad. I just knew it was you," I replied. "No, you didn't. You just thought it was me. I told you I would let myself in." His voice bellowed loudly at me. My mom walked in and seemed to try and calm him down. "Henry, he's just confused, and I'm sure he won't make the mistake again. Go easy on him," my mom said softly. Dinner was quiet that night. Between Dad being furious with me and Mom trying to keep the peace, you could cut the tension with a knife. Mom tried breaking the ice. "Any updates on Mike?" she asked. "We got a call this morning. They found him down by Deer Point Creek," he said, sounding somewhat hopeless. "Well, that's great. I'm sure his family was relieved, Mom said to him. Dad looked up with tears in his eyes. It took a moment, but both me and Mom realized the gravity of the situation. Mom never asked if he was found alive, and now somehow, we knew she didn't need to. Look at me, both of you, Dad said in a demanding voice. I don't know if it's a person or a thing, but right now, this mountain isn't safe. I can't explain the testimonies and stories that I got surrounding Mike, but I know that whoever did this is smart. He told us. They're posing as other people, pretending to be someone they're not, so that they can get in their homes and lives, he said. Dad looked over at me and saw the concern in my eyes. He excused me from the table and said he loved me before sending me to my room so he and Mom could talk. I tried listening, but I couldn't make out what was being said. Mike, wife, body, 2 weeks old, hiding, house, 2, missing, is all I could make from their chat. That night I had trouble sleeping. The jumbled words I had made out played in my head over and over like a blank record. I tried piecing together the bits of conversation that I had heard. So far, I had Mike's wife said, body 2 weeks old, someone hiding in the house. 2 kids missing. I shuddered at my concoction of the mind. What I made up Mike's wife said his body was found to be 2 weeks old, even though they found it this morning, and apparently he was only missing for a few days. That begs the question of who was with his family all that time. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the window that made my heart stop. It was too dark to see anything, but the person knocked again. Trey, can you let me in? He said. I recognized the voice. It was my father's voice. Dad, what are you doing outside? I asked. He took a moment to respond. I thought I heard something and went to check it out, but the door shut behind me. It's cold out here, buddy. Let me in. I was still frozen in fear, but somehow my concerns got worse as a figure appeared in my doorway. It was my father, wearing his typical loungewear pajamas. He held a finger up in silence to me, signaling me to be quiet. Trey, the voice from outside called out. My dad erupted so abruptly that I jumped in my bed. Get away from my house! Stay away from my family! He yelled. The voice from outside never replied. The only sounds I could hear were what seemed like low growls and something that sounded similar to a cat's purr. My dad wrapped his arms around me and told me it was okay, and he was proud of me for not complying to the person's request. The next morning, Dad called off work. He decided to stay home with me and Mom, presumably to ensure whatever was at my window last night wouldn't come back. That night, around 9 p.m, we all 3 heard a knock at the door. My dad didn't respond and held his hand up to signal all of us to remain silent. Guys, it's just me, the voice rang out. I'm headed to the station for an emergency. Did I leave my keys to the house in there? He replied. My mother had tears swiftly form in her eyes, while my heart began to beat faster and faster. I was hoping you'd show up tonight. I wanted to catch you off guard, my real father called out to the voice. The only noise that followed was a quick yelp, like a dog had been frightened, and the patter of feet scurrying away. Henry, what was that? My mother asked him. My dad held his head down as he thought about how to respond. I don't know, Amanda, but I know it wants in this house, he replied in a hushed tone. Dad radioed for several of his officer friends to come to the house. When they arrived, they found that our mailbox was torn to shreds, our flag torn from the house, and small holes dug into the yard everywhere. Whatever was at our door must have thrown a tantrum after Dad sent it away. We all three walked outside, and Dad agreed to attempt to follow the being with his friends. He made Mom promise to not open the door like usual. As we both made our way back inside, I went straight to my room to hide under the blanket and pray that I wouldn't hear a knock or a call. My pleasant surprise, I didn't. About an hour later, Dad called to tell us that he was on his way home and they couldn't find anything. I presumed Mom was in shock still, because she didn't reply. She only weakly nodded her head. Dad got home and walked straight through the door. He was scared about something, but also mad too. "Trey, Amanda, who left the door unlocked?" he yelled at us. Mom tried calming him down. "Honey, nobody knocked or tried to come in. I've been watching the door all night," she assured him. Dad looked around frantically. "Henry, I think you're just paranoid about us. We're okay, and so are you," she told him. They both walked to their bedroom as I returned to mine. The next morning, I woke up and found the house vacant. Mom nor Dad was in their room. I saw the front door open and presumed they were outside. I smelled something, though. It was a vile and disgusting smell. It was coming from their bedroom. I walked in, and the putrid aroma was coming from within their closet. I opened the closet and realized just how crucial our mistake last night was. I saw the body of my mother. A single slash wound in her neck had caused blood to spill out everywhere on the carpet. I cried as I stood there and fell to my knees. My own mother, dead in front of me. As I looked at her body, my mind began to flare, as if I had noticed something without actually noticing it. My mother didn't have a mole under her eye. As a matter of fact, her eyes were uneven, with her left eye almost drooping below her nose. She had no teeth, but upon further inspection, she had no place for them. This woman or thing wasn't my mother at all. As that thought crossed my mind, I looked up to see both of my parents storm into the room with the police. They apologized to me while escorting me outside. They said they had hoped to catch me before I woke up to explain. But the story I was given was clearly a fabricated story, to shield me from what really happened. I was told a woman was trying to break into our house after Dad had written her a ticket that pushed her over the edge, but I wasn't buying it. I knew this thing was capable of far more than just being a psycho. Psychos don't manipulate voices and faces at will. Whatever this thing was, it was dead. That's all that matters to me. As we walked to our car to allow the investigators to continue, I looked up at my dad, who had his arm around me. I noticed something. Did he always have black hair? The dead man. Damien Lovegaz said he saw a man he had seen before, crawling outside on the opposite side of the hospital building like a giant spider. He was so terrified by what he had seen that he was stuttering, which he had never done in his life. The doctors asked him to sketch what he saw through his eyes. When he drew his recent view on paper, the professional folks who study medicine were disturbed by what they had seen. He then expressed himself with 2 words. "It's real." The strangeness started 5 days ago, in the hospital in Estonia. It's a mystery as to where the type of madness that was accurate many years ago had come from. Some exclaim that it is a type of drug that is spread to junkies who love to escape the real world by inserting drugs inside them. Those who consider themselves investigators, even if they do not have any degree of any kind, theorize that they are to blame for experimental tasks by the government. Whichever was the reason for the unexplained illness, it was never recorded on any type of document. On the first day, a patient who was pronounced deceased screamed from her room, crawled to the hallway, and began to attack those who were around. Security had arrived on time and had no choice but to shoot the zombie-like patient in the head. The unconscious and unresponsive ones, those who were in a vegetative state, the doctors and nurses couldn't help but notice loud, ear-piercing screams coming from their rooms. No one had noticed the evil that was living within the hospital until the third day came around. The second floor, with patients who suffered from disabilities that prevented them from either walking or speaking, began to scream and crawl like spiders. When the doctors and nurses tried to pin them down, they fought back with force. The patients' mouths were no longer normal, human teeth, but replaced with razor-sharp jaws. Federal authorities spread the word that it was best to evacuate all medical professionals and to go with the plan of burning the building down, for no one knew the reason for the patients becoming savage. Emily Flores was on the first floor in the playroom when the hospital went on lockdown. She hated being with the others on the second floor. It only reminded her of what was wrong with her. The ability for her to walk on her own was not an option for her. A car accident occurred when she was 12. The lower part of her spine was damaged in the crash, and it left her the only option of moving around in a wheelchair. From the doctor's point of view, it was a miracle that she had survived. For Emily, it was hell. Emily also suffered not just from her legs, but from the mind as well. She set her wheelchair next to the window of the playroom, reading a scary book. She then stared out the window and viewed a gray, cloudy sky as memories began to shoot back to her mind. Memories about the twisted-looking being she called the dead man. A monstrous-looking thing her sick mind had developed when she was a little girl. The 16-year-old girl was not new to her imagination playing tricks with her head. However, she hadn't had a recent encounter since she was 13, a year after the accident. She remembered how the dead man would slam both of his hands on her bedroom door, how he would crawl on the ceiling, hissing down at where she slept, how he looked badly burnt and wore a ripped army uniform. She recalled how he would land on his knees next to her and whisper in her ear, "Emily, Emily." She recalled how he would put his face against hers and pretend to be asleep, not wanting to face the monster in front of her. She then exited the playroom and found not only the hallway pitch black, but what looked like the entire hospital. She then locked eyes to her left and stared at the darkness, at something that called for her in a whisper, "Emily." She remembers whose voice it was. The 16-year-old girl's heart began to pump. Pump, 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 pump. She turned to the other direction of the hallway and tried to make it to the exit as fast as she could. As she did, she heard her childhood monster coming up from behind her. "Emily!" She had never heard the dead man shout at her. She began to panic more, to the point where tears began streaming down her face. She was close to the door when something pushed her off her chair. She had fallen to the floor on her face. A hand turned her over and roared at her face. It was the dead man. "Emily!" She screamed and kicked to survive, but out of nowhere the lights appeared, and surrounding her were doctors and nurses wanting to calm her down. Emily was sent to a room on the 4th floor. A room where it was quiet, And there is where she met Damien Lovegaz for the first time. Where he was kept in a straitjacket, Emily was given medication to keep her calm and conscious. She lay in a bed next to Damien. Damien kept to himself and faced straight toward the wall, to where there was nothing for him to look at. Then the young girl saw something dripping from the ceiling down to her plain white blanket. It was red and wet. Her heart then began to pump like crazy. She slowly looked up, and on the ceiling was the dead man himself, gazing at the two patients. He then hissed, "Emily, Damien." Damien then opened his mouth to speak, and his words had sent horror through Emily's mind, heart, and soul. As she heard more screaming coming from the hallway outside her room, he said, "Can you see him too?" I moved into a haunted house with a dark secret. All right, gather around, Redditors, because what happened to my family is straight out of a horror movie. A few months back, we moved into this charming old Victorian house, thinking it was the perfect place for our cozy family. Little did we know, this house held a secret that would unravel our reality. The discovery began innocently enough. While exploring the dusty corners of the attic, we stumbled upon an ornate mirror, tucked away like some forgotten relic. Intrigued by its vintage charm, we brought it downstairs, unknowingly inviting an unsettling force into our lives. At first it was subtle. Late-night whispers echoed through the halls, and our dreams turned into dark, twisted scenarios. My wife began seeing figures in the mirror, shadows that moved independently of any light source. It was unsettling, to say the least. Things took a sinister turn when our daughter started playing with the mirror. She claimed it showed a different version of our living room, a distorted reality that sent shivers down our spines. Dismissing it as an overactive imagination, we soon realized the mirror was far more malevolent than we could have imagined. The whispers evolved into audible voices, mocking and distorting our thoughts. The shadows within the mirror seemed to linger longer, and the reflections took on a sinister life of their own. One night, my wife woke up to find her reflection grinning at her with a malevolence that chilled her to the bone. Freaked out and desperate, we decided to banish the mirror to the attic, hoping to rid ourselves of its eerie presence. Little did we know, the mirror's influence extended beyond its physical confines. Objects moved on their own, strange symbols appeared on the walls, and the once comforting atmosphere turned oppressive with an unspoken dread. In a last-ditch effort, we brought in a paranormal investigator. As they combed through the attic, they unraveled a dark history. The mirror was connected to a tragic event that unfolded in the house decades ago. The previous owners had tried to seal its malevolence, but it had found its way back to haunt us. Now the mirror sits locked away in a storage unit, but the nightmares persist. The whispers follow us, and the malevolent reflection surfaces in unexpected places. We can't escape the horror that the mirror unleashed upon our family. Reddit, consider this a cautionary tale. Be wary of the secrets hidden in your new home. For some reflections are portals to a darkness that never truly fades away.